This is an interview with Hanafi Libman, longtime Subud member and friend for over 50 years. Hanafi, can you start by just saying, what was your life like before coming into Subud?
Good question. Just prior to coming into Subud, I was kind of wandering around. I had left Connecticut, where I grew up, when I was 20, went to California. And it was just sort of a haphazard sort of life, pickup jobs, nothing very dramatic. And in fact, at a point, I was not working, not earning any money, and I wasn't homeless, but I didn't have a home of my own. And I was just sort of camping out wherever I could. And then one day I discovered that my weight was very low, like 135 pounds, and it startled me. And I thought, I better go do something about that. And I proceeded to go and try and find work. And as it happens, I was still 20, and I was living in Los Angeles. And at the time, it was very difficult to get a job. Being 20, one needed to be 21. So I had the brilliant scheme of going to the Department of Licensing and predating my birth date by 1 year exactly, slightly spelling my name slightly differently. This was prior to my being given a name by Bapak, and I was known as Stephen with a PH. And so I went to the Department of Licensing and I created a license with the spelling Steven, spelled Libmin instead of AN. And at the time, it was optional to give them a fingerprint. Whereas I had given them a fingerprint previously, this time I didn't, because I didn't know that that would cause some curiosity. And I went out then being Stephen Libman with a new identity at age 21. So that meant I could get a job.
Yeah.
And my first job was driving a good humor truck, which was a ridiculous job because you couldn't make any money, but it was interesting. I would harmonize with the tune that was played, da 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 dee dee da, etc. And in any event, I did that for a while in a variety of things. And then I had an invitation from my brother who was living in Colorado, Aspen, Colorado, to come there, join him. He would get me a job. And so I hitched to Aspen, Colorado. And it so happened the day I got there, which was in November, just before Thanksgiving, one of his roommates couldn't take a job, and I took that job for an interim, which was building a fence out in the snow with some of other people. And so I had a job for the first couple of days before my real job was to begin, which was an exceptional job at a very famous bar.
Famous what?
Bar and restaurant.
Oh.
And it was called the Red onion. And that job didn't begin until the ski season, and this was just before Thanksgiving. And so I was there, actually, just as an aside, when President Kennedy was assassinated. And it was a very nice life with my brother. I had a super job. So happened there was a future Subud brother who remains a very close friend now, Victor Wamet. We both worked in the same restaurant prior to our being in Subud. And we did that for a while until the season ended. And then I ended up in another phenomenal job where I was the bell captain at another very famous resort, which was where Jackie Kennedy came. And a quick aside was, as I was sitting on the floor in front of a couch with Jackie Kennedy helping her with her ski boots, I fell in love with Jackie Kennedy immediately. Her charisma is real, or was real. And I was completely taken. But unfortunately, that was an unrequited love. And so I continued with my job as bell captain and at a place called the Aspen Meadows.
So when
And pardon me?
So when you were with Jackie Kennedy helping her with her boots, was this before or after the assassination?
After.
Ah.
This was after. That family, Robert Kennedy, McNamara, a lot of those folks came up to Aspen. This was not a luxurious resort, but it was very popular, and it had a 4-star restaurant or 5-star restaurant that was associated with it called the Copper Kettle. And they did things like the Aspen Music Festival. I was there for Benjamin Britten conducting the orchestra. They had an Aspen Film Festival at this institute, which was just a great place, a lucky place for me to have gotten a job.
Yeah.
And somewhere in that period of time, as we're talking 1963, so memories are not crystal clear, I had lived in a variety of places, apartments sharing, and I was invited to move in to a house, an A-frame, as it happened, on what is called Red Mountain. And it was rented by a woman by the name of Laraswati Wamet. Well, her name was not Laraswati Wamet at the time. It was Beverly Voorhees. And she and another woman had come to Aspen, Vicky Taft. And they were Subud members. And so that was my first introduction to learning about Subud, which Laraswati she wasn't reluctant to talk about it, but she always advised, listen, all these words are nothing. If you're interested, you just need the experience of doing it. And I just accepted that. And I didn't have a particularly strong interest because I was not a person questing for spiritual enlightenment. And I was too busy just fooling around, having a good time.
Mm-hmm.
And in any event, after a season or so of the winter season, Vicky and then Beverly were going back to Los Angeles. And by then, Victor, then Billy Wamet, and Beverly were a couple. And I did have a crush on Vicky, but nothing ever came of that. And so I thought, well, shucks, here are my good friends going back to Los Angeles. I guess I'll do that too. And I did. I went back separately from them. I think I was living in an apartment hotel. And I had gotten a job at a place called the Friars Club, which is a very well-known place that was, its membership was the upper crust of Los Angeles. Not so much the waspy upper crust, but the movie upper crust, the mafia upper crust, the people like that.
Yeah.
And it was, again, another incredible job. And I was there. In fact, one of the members' sons, who I'd become friendly with, he was kind of a mafia middleman, low end, not Italian. He was Jewish. And they invited me to live at their house, which I did. And meanwhile, I had, of course, would see Victor. And one day we were riding in his car, and I said, "Where are you going?" And he said, "I joined Subud." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I remembered." And I said, "Well, gee, I guess I ought to do that too."
And
And so
who was this person?
Victor Wamet.
So Victor was the one you're talking about who worked for
No, Victor was my friend from Aspen,
yeah.
who was by now married to Laraswati Wamet, Laraswati, and had joined Subud.
Okay.
I was living with the people from the Friars Club, and I decided, at that point, when Victor mentioned it, I joined Subud. I went down, which has an interesting side note too, because when I became an applicant for Subud, we would sit outside in front of the Latihan Hall, the men's Latihan Hall at Hope Street, which was the Subud Los Angeles Subud House. And we would just sit out there during this applicant period and wait for our time. And 3 months passed, and I went to one of the helpers. Labasir English was his name, at the time known as Happy English, Texas man, large, tall, funny guy. And I said, "Hey, it's 3 months. I want to be open." And I can still picture him, because there was a room at Subud Los Angeles. That was the helper's room. And he was standing in the doorway when I asked him, and he was taller than me. He looked down at me and he went, "Hmm." And he kind of closed his eyes as though he was receiving about this. And he went, "Not yet, little brother." And what did I know, So I went, "Oh, okay." And proceeded to go back and sit in front of the Latihan Hall for X whatever amount of time again as an applicant. So probably 2 months later, one of the people, the Subud people, who by now I was a fixture and was friends with everybody there. I was part of the community. And I saw her one day and she said, you know, I came in late for Latihan and I saw you sitting out in front of the men's Latihan. And I would like to tell you, I think you're ripe. Because, of course, I was head thrown back, mouth open, out. And I can't remember that woman's name, although we had all been very good friends. I believe she's known now as perhaps Ramuna. But in any event, I went, oh. And so I went and asked again, and I was open. Now, I was still working at the Friars Club. And in this place with pretty heavyweight mafia, big time. A man who was known as the capo mafioso of Las Vegas. John Roselli was there, and a lot of other people. And being a pretty naive but fairly smart individual, I thought these people were pretty interesting. And of course, I was living in this household with someone who ran what was called a pan club. It was a game, some kind of gambling penguin. And in any event, I was very attracted to these folks. And I didn't do much running of errands for them, but I was always very interested in helping them out. And my boss did run errands. He would pick them up in the middle of the night and bring them hither and yon. And there were people sitting in cars in front of the garage where I parked cars at this garage. And they were obviously police of some sort, undercover, and they were watching the band. I mean, the Friars Club. One of my friends was even approached by the FBI and asked to inform. He didn't have anything to inform, but they tried to make contact with him. And so one day I had the opportunity, or for a week while my boss was away, and I was running the garage and I was putting Mr. Roselli's car up front. And when he got back, he called me aside. He said, they've just had a meeting about you and they think you're an informant. And so your employment is hereby terminated. And the reality was, I was very attracted to them. And I considered it a gift, a grace. I had just recently been opened. And in reality, in actuality, it was a gift.
Yeah.
Because if I had not been removed from there, I would be working for them, if still alive.
Mm-hmm.
I would have been working for them. And I was crushed. I couldn't believe that these people were telling me, they'd had a meeting about me and decided I was an informant and left. So that was an interesting side note, never to be proved other than internally. My knowledge of that internally is that I know that I was given a gift.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting time. I had recognized, and it's an interesting story. Another little side note. I hadn't realized that I told this story to an applicant once when I was acting as an applicant, as a helper. But when I was an applicant, something would always happen to kind of prevent me from going either to be an applicant or to get to the Latian. There'd be a flat tire. There'd be something that would go on. And call me crazy, but one day I finally said, talking to the air, I said, I've had it with you guys, whoever you are, with whatever this phenomenon is. I'm going to Subud. I'm going to Latian. I don't care if you try and stop me over and over again, but I'm going. And I did. But it entered the realm of humorous. It truly was humorous. It was like, why should I not have change to get on the bus when my pockets had been full of change or something like that?
Yeah.
It was constant. And so, as I say, it became a humorous silliness. And fortunately, I stuck with it. And in fact, one of my prayers, honestly, was, please, God, don't let me get led astray. I can see how easy it is. I could see it happening to people all around me. And for the silliest reasons in the world, a disagreement, a curiosity, a something, and they would disappear. And I vowed to not disappear. So that was whatever year that was, 1965, I guess,
Okay.
is when I was opened in Subud, Los Angeles.
How was your opening? Did you feel anything specifically, or?
It was actually not earth-shaking.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty quiet. I questioned it, if I remember correctly. I didn't feel anything particularly unique. Afterwards, I had some experiences. It was very easy for me, and it actually is still very easy for me to compare my Subud Latihan experience with others, which of course is absurdly silly. But it would be, that person has had this experience. They've received that, they've seen that, they've done this, etc. And these things did not happen to me. But on occasion, something unique, the one that keeps springing to mind was one day when I had moved off into my own place in Venice, California, by Santa Monica. I had a little attic apartment. And one day I was doing Latihan, and for some reason, I don't know, it might have been spontaneous. And I had this experience of feeling a flame on the outside of me. It was like I was inside this flame, and it was burning. It was a flame, but it wasn't burning me at all. And I remember feeling like this was some sort of relation to the burning bush in the Bible that burned, yet it did not consume the bush.
Yeah.
And I felt like something was being burned, and it didn't matter exactly what it was, but it was happening. And understanding doesn't always accompany my experiences. It's now not like, now you know, etc. They happen and they're for me to accept, and maybe something later is illuminating.
Yeah.
But I'm content by and large with the experience and with the feeling that when I can understand something, I will. And that sometimes things are just there for me to witness and accept.
Yeah. So did you have much of a chance to be around Bapak, and did you have any experiences related to him?
I became a committee member in various roles. And so that frequently, when Bapak was coming to town, and Bapak was coming to LA pretty regularly in those years.
Yeah.
And so I did get to see Bapak and hear Bapak. And I did have my personal experiences, not so much in direct contact with Bapak or conversations, but I was there and I was doing these jobs on the committee of some sort. And one thing that I've related recently was I was the wheelchair guy for Ibu. I just got into this job where I would grab the wheelchair and push her to wherever she needed to go. And one of my experiences was after a talk at the Miramar Hotel where Bapak would always stay when he was in Los Angeles. He and Ibu were walking down the side aisle, not in the center, and I was seated way over on the side, the left side facing the stage. And there I was with my wheelchair for Ibu. And Bapak turned, looked at me, and he went, and I answered in English, "Yes, Bapak, I'm going to put Ibu in the wheelchair and then we'll lift her up over the stairs to get her upstairs." And later on, I realized that he never said a word, but there was absolutely, I knew exactly what he was saying. And I was very close with a Subud brother at the time by the name of Rusty Lane. And Rusty was, in fact, a spectacular mime. And Rusty used to exclaim, "Bapak is the best mime in the world." Because he was. He just, when he stood in front of us, if he did something, if he moved his hands, you didn't even have to necessarily hear the words. You got it. He conveyed that through his body, through his movement. And that was a great one, though. That was a really funny one. And I always remembered it because it was so much fun, because after the fact, I realized that this person had never said a word. I knew exactly what he meant. I answered him and did what was requested. Another really interesting experience that I had with Bapak's family was, again, as I was a committee member, And I was standing in a room, it was early morning. And there was always a committee room or two on the 8th floor where Bapak stayed. And I was standing in there, I was talking with a fellow who I still remember. His name was Mercelin Spencer. And he and I were standing and talking together. And I remember him expressing something about how the cosmos was worshiping, that was the state of the cosmos, which I accepted as being true and still do. And two women walked into the room, knocked on the door, and came in the room. And they were both wearing long batik and a white blouse. And one of the women had shoulder-length hair. And she was absolutely, more than beautiful. She was just beautiful. And I'd been up there. I did my Ibu work, et cetera, et cetera. I knew who all these people were. And this was someone I had never seen. It was like, who in the world is that? And I turned to Mercelin and I said, Mercelin, who is that? And he looked at me and he said, it's Ibu. And it took a while, but I later realized that I was seeing, I don't know whether you call it the real Ibu or a different Ibu, but not the lady that was always wrapped in clothes and with a scarf around her head and her glasses on and needing help in a wheelchair. This was this absolutely beautiful, beautiful, beautiful woman. And that was her. That was her.
Wow.
And there was nothing else associated with it. It was like normal sight. There were no glowings or rainbows or it was just, who's that woman standing over there by the door? So that was pretty special.
Yeah.
Unexpected, but unique. So, some years later, another, for me, really super experience had to do with when we were at Chalandak for the World Congress in 1971. And aside from that, my friend, also named Rusty, but Rusty Genet or Genest, who was a sculptor, Rusty on occasion said to me, has Bapak answered your question? And he would literally ask it like that. Did Bapak answered your question? And it's like, what are you talking about? I didn't ask him a question. And one day he said, well, Bapak always, when you're around and he's around, Bapak answers your question, your inner question. And I said, oh, I hadn't noticed. So during that World Congress, Bapak said, we're going to do the business of the Congress first before we do anything in the Kejimon. We are going to finish the business and then Bapak will do talks and testing. So we did. So we finished the business of the Congress and there was Latihan for the first night of that. And I remember walking around the room doing that Latihan. And inside of me, I kept hearing, So what is the big deal? You're moving your hands, you're walking, you're mouthing words or whatever you're doing. What is the big deal? You're just, this is all just hands, feet, mouth, legs. And, finish the latte. I never thought about it again. Next night, Bapak gives a talk. And he said, literally, you may wonder what's so special about this latte. After all, you're just walking like you do normally. You're just moving your hands like you do normally. You're just doing all the things that you do in life. But there's a difference. When you do them in Latihan, they're moved by the power of God. So my question was answered. And I never experienced asking any more questions that I remember exactly like that were so obvious. I mean, it was like perfect. It was absolutely perfect. Another funny experience that I had was in San Francisco, where Papa gave it. We did Latihan, maybe Papa talked, I don't remember. But I was upset. I was really upset because my Latihan had been tumultuous. My brain was extremely active, and I was thinking, and I didn't feel like I was doing Latihan. What is this? This is supposed to be bliss. This is supposed to be contact with the power of God. This is supposed to be a wonderful emancipation. And here I am in agony, just angst. I was a wreck. And I said, that's it. I'm going to go find him. I'm going to ask the question. This is it. I've had enough. And so I went downstairs, wherever we were, and I saw Bapak go into this room. And I was standing there still churning and trying to figure out how I was going to go ask him this question. And in whatever this place was, this hotel or something, there were big columns, big, like marble, granite, big, feet across columns of stone, smooth. And this one was yellow and brownish tones. And I was standing there waiting, trying to figure out how I was going to go in there and confront Bapak. And I wanted some answers. And I put my hand on that post, on that column. And something reminded me. And I felt that column, and it was polished. And suddenly I realized that the inside of my head felt polished. And that this experience of that Latihan was the inside of my head, my brain, my thinking was being polished and smoothed. And in later years, I realized that when you finish Latihan, you finish and leave it inside where you've done Latihan. Don't bring it out with you. I had brought it out with me, but that was a separate issue. But that this was this gift, that in fact, I was being polished. My brain was my thought was being polished. And I I compare that experience now with, for those people who are familiar with our once popular TV show where there was a character by the name of Emily Latilla. And Emily Latilla would go off on a tangent. And then suddenly, when she got the answer right, she'd go, "Oh, never mind."
Yeah, I remember that.
And that was my experience. Oh, never mind. And I was able to leave. So, you know, those are highlights, Bapak highlights from my life.
So how did you get from Los Angeles to, let's see, what's the place on the east?
Skymont.
Skymont, yeah. How did you get there?
Well, I had been married in a double ceremony. Raouf, Ramsey, and Letitia. And Itzia Caspers and I had all decided independently we were getting married. And one day, Raouf and I were talking, and he said, "Well, why don't we have a double wedding?" And so we did. And there was an imam from San Francisco who several people had used to marry him. And we decided that we wanted to have a Muslim wedding, and we would hire and bring this imam down from San Francisco. In any event, this is just a little prequel to the fact that Raouf and Letitia and Hanafi and Insia actually shared a two-family house. We lived upstairs, the Ramseys were downstairs. And one day Raouf said, "I'm going to be going to Skymont, and I'm going to be helping create this facility for Bapak's Congress." And I thought, wow, that sounds interesting. And I was working in the dark room at the Arts Photo, where you and I met on our world side, our working side. And I just was sitting there in that dark room in the dark and working, and I kind of thought, wow, this sounds really interesting. And so when I got done with work, one day, that day, whenever it was, I went home and said to Insia, "How would you like to go on an adventure?" Literally, that's what I said. And we did. We took off. I went and I talked to Mas Prio. And I said, "Mas, what do you think about my going there?" And he said, "Can you get work?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." And he said, "Cool." Because that was the big criterion, don't just go running off. And as it turned out, that was a huge deal. That was a huge deal to get work. And I tried to be a commercial photographer there. That wasn't going to happen in rural Virginia. I ended up working in some funny little dark room, printing, but that's fine. I got work. But because I had eventually learned after my days on the streets, you can get work. It may not be the nicest job in the world, but if you need work, you can get work. Wash dishes, whatever, you can get work. And so I wasn't afraid of not being able to get work. And we had a 1-ish-year-old daughter, and we packed up the car with our belongings and headed to Virginia. And it was a phenomenal experience. Phenomenal. It was a very difficult experience in a lot of ways. And some of the women maintained that it was easier for the men. I don't know. It was hard. It was hard. It was hard to get work. But the women were kind of, in a traditional sense, quotes around traditional, were left to mind the home. And, you know, there wasn't always running water. There weren't always bathrooms. There were a whole lot of things. It was pretty crude, but it was okay. At least it was pretty remarkable. I enjoyed my time there. And I became a sort of a semi-facilities manager to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would take care of certain things, arrange for things, bills to get paid when they came to deliver coal or what have you. And I would report to Livingston because Livingston would go off for work. And he'd come back, and then I would have this thing where I literally unloaded, reported, not in an uncomfortable way, but I had the internal journal that I would convey to him of everything that went down about the place to Livingston Dodson. And it really was a pretty remarkable experience for us all.
So how about when Bapak came? How was it then?
I was working, doing some stuff having to do with food, serving. I don't even know what exactly. And I didn't even really think of it as a spiritual experience. It was just life. It was normal. Bapak was normal. Bapak was just part of my life.
Yeah.
And I wasn't looking for anything out of the experience of Bapak being there other than, yes, being there, and wonderful that we were with Bapak and got to hear talks and testing, which were always valuable to me. But it was sort of almost, yeah, there was the miraculous, but it was very normal. And our community, our Subud community, was very strong. It was tremendous brotherhood, sisterhood feeling, which still exists today, 50 years later, with many of those people. So, and the opportunities I got to work with Rusty Lane and Hamid Camp and Louis Mercelin Arquette. We had a theater troupe. We were on the road with that theater troupe, which was miraculous. Working, I was as much an audience member as a participant because I could watch, particularly Hamid and Rusty, all day long. Their talent was so great that, and their individual natures were so amazing, stunning, wide, that they were just a phenomenon to get to witness, to get to watch and be with. So to me, that was a huge gift. It was a huge gift. And there's all manner of mini stories within it, that personal too, but that were just were wonderful. And Mas Prio was there. And Mas Prio, I was there when Bapak asked the group at the Miramar, I think. He said, Bapak would like to send a spiritual ambassador. Be an ambassador, but he'll be a spiritual ambassador for you folks here in the States. How would you like that? And I don't know if there were people that didn't agree, but every hand in the room that I saw stretched to reach the ceiling and saying, yeah, we really wanted that. That was really sounded wonderful to us. The reality is that Prio was not received always with that enthusiasm. He was a challenge. He was a challenge to some of the old guard helpers that, the boss was sending a lieutenant to town who might know more than you. And so I got to witness just a bit of it on the outside, and Prio never complained, never said a word about it, but I remember him telling me one time that when he got off the plane to come to the States, he said, the monster of the United States met me, the demon. And, I don't know what that means exactly, but I can remember feeling it. And so it was a challenge for him, but it was a job that Bapak appointed him to do, expected him to do. And sure, he got himself in trouble because he's a human being, and who knows, said things, did things. I truly don't know. But by and large, he was Bapak's ambassador. And he really did share stuff, and he was never a teacher. He never fell into that trap. He never put himself above that I could ever see. But he kind of just tried to exemplify some of the stuff that Bapak talked about in his talks and guide us into doing them, fasting for Ramadan, doing Monday, Thursday fasting, things like that. And for me, that was invaluable in my life. And I think for a lot of other people. And so, at first I got to know him very slightly in LA, but much more so when we were at Skymont, when he lived there. I used to shop for him, for their food, for their cooking. I shopped. And and it was always fun because I would buy things that I would never buy for myself, organ meats, kidneys, curious things that can't remember her name, Rukmawati would love. And that was So I got into that. That was, that was my job, part of my curious job. So, it was a little stunning when Bapak kind of criticized the experiment of Skymont and said, what are you guys doing here? You're not making any money, and this isn't working. And so that was pretty tricky to deal with internally. But I don't know. We got over it.
So was it that comment that kind of ended the Skymont experience?
It was a big part of it. Yeah. Bapak was critical of it, or what we'd done with it, or I don't know exactly. I never felt it was a waste of time. My feeling was that it just didn't work. We just didn't make it work. We didn't know how. And because Prio's intent, a big part of it was to create a cultural community as well. And because a lot of Bapak's advice had been, through our culture, we will grow and Subud will become spread, not overtly, but through our culture, sort of without even saying anything, just exposure to our culture.
So was there ever any evidence of that spreading?
No, I would say not that I can think of. Not emanating from Skymont.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps to some small scale emanating from some of the music that Hamid did, or theater that they did, but not from Skymont. Yeah, it didn't happen that way. But no.
So what led to you leaving Skymont?
Well, I felt actually, our band, which was known as the Sparker Band, was made up of Aswan Karapetian and Darsono Ramsey, Miles Simons, who was from Vancouver, and myself. But there were people that were going to join us. Mahmoud and Lucas Rowe, who were from Woodstock, Vermont. Elisha Gullickson, who was living in New York. So Aswan and the Rowe brothers and I drove Hamidatul Karapetian's car. We said, okay, this will be a way for us to get her car to Vancouver. And we drove, the four of us in this little Opel, drove across the country, Trans-Canada Highway mostly, to Vancouver, because Miles Simons, who was from there, had set us up. There was a Subud enterprise of management consultants And we went because we were going to take our talents and use them and broaden them there in Canada. There was opportunity for me to do some commercial voice work. Miles and Aswan were both graphic artists. Lucas was a music teacher, writer. So we went to these consultants and we had kind of a plan sketched out for ourselves to work there. And we kind of, so that was the plan. And the Rose were not here yet in Seattle, nor was Elisha. But we decided we would go, and the Carpathians. And so we moved here to Seattle to start trying to do our thing. And I think we kind of crumbled prematurely. We ran into obstacles about getting into Canada and just kind of gave it up and said, okay, well, we'll just do it in Seattle. And we really weren't able to. Actually, that plan had been set up in Canada and there were contacts in Canada. We had people that but we had none in Seattle. So we just came to Seattle and I went to work in a factory as an electrician. Aswan, plied his trade as in graphics, doing what he could. And we waited for everybody to get here. And eventually Elisha and Ruth Gullickson came. Well, Elisha was a piano technician, so he was able to ply his trade. And, Lucas, well, eventually was a music teacher at an elementary school. And Mahmoud Rowe went to work in an enterprise. So we worked, but we never. The band was never successful, and all our other endeavors never came to pass. So, but we were happy here. So that's how we ended up in Seattle. And interestingly, there was a real buzz about Seattle in those years, 1974. Seattle was really kind of becoming a place to be in the country. And as it happened, we brought a lot of energy to the Subud group. Elisha and I became national committee. I was the chairman. Elisha was the vice chairman of Subud USA. So we brought a lot of Subud energy to Seattle, and people started moving here. It was kind of a phenomenon. So, it was interesting. I think one member, I think he defined it as as holy wars, because there was kind of an older guard that they weren't bad, but it was just they'd never had that kind of energy. We were all pretty gung-ho people with a lot of belief in that we could pull stuff off, and did to some degree, you know. Although Seattle was a very strong place because there were two very strong enterprises here. There was an enterprise which had been an invention of Lawrence Krauss, which were sprouting devices, and it was a Subud group enterprise, and it was successful. And also Edward Hyatt, who was a pretty smart, accomplished business guy. He had a company called Manna Milling, and it was organic grains. And Edward was one of the real early people who donated substantial amounts of money to Subud from his enterprise. And he was just an enterprising character. He I worked for him for a while. He established a vitamin business. So, and I worked for him in his mill, in his flour mill. So we had actually lived with the Hyatts for a couple of weeks. When we first got here, they opened their house to us, and we lived there with two kids and ourselves until I found work and a house.
So Edward has passed away. Is his wife still around? I think her name was Rowana.
Rowana.
Yeah.
Rowana Hyatt. She was still around. She did get married later to someone. She had been our treasurer for Subud USA. And when Edward passed away, she kind of disappeared. But I just, in fact, within the past few months, kind of looked her up to try and see where she was and see how she had, maybe just a year or so ago, had sold the house that they owned, a wonderful old house in an area called Seward Park. So, yeah.
So any other experiences that stand out?
Nothing springs to mind at the moment. I think there are so many, we'll call them parallels in my life, that the guidance of God is there. It's not like waving banners. That somebody can point to miracles yet. The evidence is pretty constant. And I've noticed lately, because I have a health thing that came up, and I started seeking some other doctors, and doors just sprung open after this little bit of, it was remarkable because I couldn't find anybody, I couldn't get in, I couldn't do this, I couldn't, and all of a sudden it was like amazing. And they're happenstance, but to me, they're more than happenstance. They're a little bit of help. I have no idea how it works. I have no idea how it works. My byline, my Subud byline, if I was to state anything that I have learned, is that I know nothing about how the cosmos works. Nothing. And that I have, we'll call it a theory, but I also am anti-theory. I believe that theories are kind of a waste of time because they only go so far. They go a little ways and you go, I got it. I understand how this works. And it's like, okay, you're given a little bit of understanding about how an aspect of something might work sometimes. And I have developed my recent thought is there's computer language. You have computer language. And stuff is duplicated, I think, through the cosmos. It's like the picture of an atom and the picture of a solar system. And all these patterns kind of repeat. Well, I think that computer programming fits into a sort of a cosmic pattern. And the way that I see it, of course, which is very incomplete, the way that I see it is there's this computer language, which is if, and then you have some parameters. If two things are put together with another two things, then you have four things. That's an if then. And it can be anything. If this number occurs, 50 times in a sequence, then, and some conclusion is drawn, and it can be anything. But so that's how computer language is kind of written. If this occurs, then we're going to make that happen, which will make this happen, which will then, conclusion, yippee. Except that there's another set phrase that comes after if then, and that is except when.
Except when, okay.
Except when. And that's God. It's like, yeah, every time, if, then, except when. And so it's realizing that except when is probably the only constant that you ever come upon, is that except when is all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think that's my evaluation of the universe. Except when.
So what's your evaluation of being in Subud? What has that been for you?
A godsend, literally. I recognize from that earliest time when I was moved out of that work situation, right as I was joining Subud, that was a gift. And it's like I think it's remarkable. I think I don't know how it all works by even the greatest stretch of the imagination. It's yet I feel that there are certain criteria, there are certain things that are real, that are fixed, that are, and so I know, I mean, I can see it even in my relationships over time through my children, through my partners, through that there's a continuity, and that Subud isn't at the base of it. Our contact with the power, with the life force, with something that's come about because we've been given this opportunity through the contact that comes through Subud, which is maybe a name that's what we call it now, but whatever it is existed throughout time, that we have no clue as to how much time has transpired in the universe. And but that the Latihan that Subud is the most important aspect of probably of my life. And that's come about as a result of, maybe we won't say Subud is, but the contact is, the Latihan is the, and I'd say without meaning that Subud isn't important, because I think Subud is ultimately incredibly important. I have to say, there's one thing that on a very personal kind of experience. Shortly after I was married, I don't know how much longer, but one night I had done Latihan, and I'm very inexperienced with, as I've said, my life has not been a big spiritual experience, extravaganza. But I got these words: remember this date. It's like, oh, okay, August 17th. Remember this date. Okay. So I've done Latihan. I go into bed with my wife. Sexual relationship. That was the night that Mariama was conceived. And I was told, little old me, who knew nothing. But then X amount of time later, and you count the days, and pregnancy is 280 days, and you go, oh, far out. 280x, whatever it was, bingo. So I just think that we just haven't got a clue as to the guidance that's continually raining down on us, that we are gradually being able to decipher and understand as individuals, totally individuals. Which in and of itself, if you stop to think about it, it's like, how does that work? It's all these millions of people, and each one is on their path and is receiving guidance, no matter what. They may just don't pay attention to it. They may be totally unaware of it. They may be encrusted with stuff that they can't get through to it. They may be totally aware of it. They may be every variation in between. And yet that's happening, I believe. That's happening. Probably throughout the universe, in whatever, however it works, you know? So to me, I've never tried to figure it out because I don't think I'm capable. And I kind of get a kick. I'm a little bit of a wise ass when I hear people trying to figure it out because I think it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And yet, maybe that's theirs to do. That's theirs to do. They need to try and figure it out. I may think it's ridiculous, but that's really part of their path. Or not. You know, maybe I'm right in that, oh, you're wasting your time, or maybe I'm not. So just stay clear.
Except when.
Yeah, exactly. Except when. Exactly. So it's like, you've got to be really careful to make conclusions, draw conclusions. So, I don't know. I don't know if that is at all relates to the question that you just asked.
I think I'm out of questions unless you have something more to add.
No, I don't think so. I'm really pretty, well, you know, there's certainly plenty of dissatisfactions, but I'm pretty happy with my life.
Me too.
Yeah. And here we are. I don't know if you've experienced anything. I don't know if you hit the magic number yet, but I think there was a change at 80. I think there's something different that happens at that age. Something different.
Well, if you figure it out, let me know.
You know, I just think it does. I think there's something that changes. Well, you know, in Indonesian culture, there's the thing about windows every 8 years. And how Bapak said, well, you know, after the 8th at 64, you can just join Subud because at that point, X happens, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think there's something to it.
So we're in our 10th window.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Yeah. Exactly. And it means, I will go so far as to say, I think it means something.
Okay. Except when.
Yeah. So be careful on saying absolute. But at this point in time, I am believing that there is something to it. Yeah. And I think, now I don't know how this is implemented or if it's even real, but I think that people at a certain age have wisdom that they can impart.
That they cannot
They
impart.
can't. they can,
Oh, they can impart. Okay.
and that it might be cool if there was a way to do that.
Yeah. Thank you, Hanafi. I appreciate you doing this.
It was great. It was great fun.
Yeah. I'm going to sign off now
Coolio.
and see you in the real life here.
Okay. See you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.